She raised him alone, he was her only child. Her joy. Her answered prayer, and just when life was finally beginning to smile on them, they killed him, but that wasn't the end, because God made her a promise, ask anything, and it will be done, and what she asked for shook everyone. This is how the story began. Grace was 28 when she married David. Theirs wasn't the kind of love people wrote songs about or whispered in poems. It was quiet, honest, and rooted in faith. They were both members of the sprawling church on Adams Street, in Adesoa Street off Bogaich Road. A massive building with tall stained-glass windows and a bell that sang over the city every Sunday morning. David was a carpenter. Not the richest, not the most handsome, but his eyes held a kindness that made people trust him. Grace was the shy choir girl whose voice could hush a room, though she barely spoke when the hymns ended. Their love bloomed in simple ways. David would bring her fresh mangoes after a long day's work, and Grace would hum to him while she swept the front yard. He built her a small wooden box with her name carved into it on their wedding day. Inside, she kept every little note he ever wrote her, no matter how ordinary. They made a home out of a modest house with a rusted zinc roof. When the rain poured, the rhythm on the roof became their lullaby. On quiet nights, they sat on the front porch counting stars, her head resting on his shoulder. A year into their marriage, Grace conceived. The joy was indescribable. David would come home and place his rough palms on her swelling belly, laughing. "This one will have my eyes and your stubbornness," he'd tease. Grace would laugh, swatting his arm playfully. "As long as he has your heart," but their happiness was short-lived. 3 months before the baby was due, David fell ill. It started as a mild fever. The town doctor waved it off as malaria. "He just needs rest." David's skin grew clammy, and his breathing shallow. She held his hand every night, singing softly to him, praying through tears. One night, the sky split open with thunder, and the rain beat against their little home. David turned weakly to her, his eyes glazed but gentle. "Grace, promise me you'll raise our child in God's house. Never stop praying for him." Her heart shattered. "No, David, you'll see him yourself. You'll carry him." But David smiled faintly, squeezing her hand. "Promise," she choked on her tears. "I promise," and before dawn, he was gone. Grace clutched his Bible to her chest as the sun rose, her sobs the only sound in the house. 3 months later, after hours of labor in a dimly lit room, Grace gave birth to a son. She named him Daniel. From the moment Daniel let out his first cry, Grace's heart found reason to beat again. She would stare at his tiny face, the spitting image of David, and whisper, "You are my joy, my light, my everything." Grace worked any job she could find, sweeping compounds, washing clothes, fetching water. But every morning, before the city awoke, she wrapped baby Daniel on her back and went to the church. While others slept, she swept the sanctuary, cleaned the pews, scrubbed the altar, and sang softly to her boy. She spoke to him constantly, even when he was too little to reply. "See, Daniel, this is where God sits," she'd say, pointing to the altar. When Daniel began to crawl, Grace would chase after him, giggling. When he took his first steps inside the church, she clapped, tears in her eyes. As he grew, he'd run around the pews, pretending to be a preacher. "Mama, say, Amen." He'd shout, "Amen, my son." She'd reply, laughing until her sides hurt. Those moments were her treasures. At night, when the city quieted, Grace would lay beside him on a thin mattress, stroking his hair. "Daniel, promise me you'll always love God." "I promise, Mama. And you'll take care of me when I'm old and toothless." Daniel would grin. "You'll always have teeth, Mama. And I'll build you a big house." They laughed. They dreamed, and so the bond grew, a love forged in sacrifice, faith, and whispered prayers. Daniel excelled in school. Grace, though poor, made sure he lacked nothing. She sold roasted plantains by the roadside, walked miles to fetch water for others, and cleaned houses just to buy him books. Every report card, Daniel would run home, waving it in the air. "Mama. First position again." Grace would lift him high, kissing his cheeks. My Daniel. God's own. I'm proud of you. After secondary school, Daniel earned a scholarship to university. The day he left for school, Grace packed his clothes. Her heart breaking and swelling with pride all at once. Don't forget your prayers, my son, she whispered, pressing a small, worn-out Bible into his hands. I'll never forget, Mama. And he didn't. Whenever he came home, he would sit on the floor by her feet, resting his head on her lap, telling her about city life and school. Grace would stroke his hair. You'll be great, my child. The world will hear your name. When Daniel graduated, his first stop was home. He bought her a new mattress, stocked her tiny kitchen, and built a small extension to their house. Mama, this is just the beginning. Soon, I'll move you to the city. Grace smiled. As long as you're happy, my son. He found work, a good one. Moved to a big house. Bought a sleek car, but every Sunday, Daniel called, Mama, how's your health? Are you eating well? I'm fine, my son. God keeps me. And when he visited, he'd sit at her feet, eating her famous jollof rice, teasing her, Mama, you'll come live with me soon. No more climbing that hill to church. Grace laughed. God's house is my rest. I'll clean it till my legs can't move. Daniel adored his mother. She was his rock, his anchor in a world that changed too quickly, but fate had other plans. The sun was beginning to set when Daniel pulled up in front of his mother's small bungalow. The air was thick with the scent of roasted corn from a neighbor's stall down the street. Grace was outside, sitting on a low wooden stool, peeling yam with steady hands. Mama. Daniel called, stepping out of his car. Grace's face lit up, wrinkles stretching into a radiant smile. My son. She dropped the knife and rushed toward him, wrapping her thin arms around his waist. My fine boy, she said, stepping back to study his face. You've grown lean in that city, oh. Are you eating well? Daniel chuckled. Too well, Mama. That's why I've brought someone to meet you. The passenger side of the car door slid open and out stepped Juliet. Tall, light-skinned, dressed in a fitted gown that shimmered in the dying light. Her makeup flawless, heels clicking against the rough gravel. Grace's smile faltered for a second, a coldness brushing her spirit. This is Juliet, Daniel said, beaming. The woman I told you about. Grace forced a smile. You're welcome, my daughter. Come in, come in. Inside the small parlor, Juliet looked uncomfortable. She eyed the old curtains, the worn-out cushions, the framed photograph of David on the wall. Grace served them steaming jollof rice and fried plantain. Juliet barely touched hers, complaining softly, Mama, it's too spicy, she said, pushing the plate aside. Grace watched her, a knot forming in her chest. A little pepper is good for the body, she said quietly. Later that evening, while Juliet stepped outside to take a call, Grace pulled Daniel aside into the tiny kitchen. My son, she began, her voice low, I see you love this girl. But open your eyes. There's something about her spirit I do not trust. Daniel sighed. Mama, you've only just met her. A mother knows, Daniel. Beauty can hide a bitter heart. Lo. He took her hands. Mama, I love you. I hear you. But please, give her a chance. Grace bit her lip, staring into her son's hopeful eyes. I only want your happiness, my child. He hugged her. I promise, Mama. You'll see. She'll love you too. But Grace's heart stayed uneasy long after they left. The wedding was grand. It took place in a vast cathedral in the heart of the city, with towering stained-glass windows and white lilies lining the aisles. Daniel looked dashing in his suit, his face beaming with joy. Grace, seated quietly at the back, watched with a strange ache in her chest. The bride was stunning in a flowing white gown, her makeup perfect, her smile fixed. Grace noticed how Juliet barely glanced in Daniel's direction throughout the ceremony, her eyes flitting around the hall like someone searching for something or someone. After the vows, while guests clapped and cheered, Grace quietly left. She could no longer fight the heaviness in her spirit. Later that week, Daniel came to visit. He arrived alone. "Mama," he began, settling on the floor beside her, resting his head on her lap like a little boy. "You didn't stay for the reception. I looked for you." Grace stroked his hair. "My son, I saw all I needed to see." Daniel frowned. "Mama, don't start. She's my wife now. I have no problem with that. But tell me. Since you married her, has she visited here even once? Has she asked about me? Called me? Sent greetings?" Daniel fell silent. "She told you the city isn't good for old women like me, didn't she?" He sighed heavily. Grace lifted his chin gently. "Listen to your mother. Love can be blinding, but when your heart is quiet at night, you'll hear what your spirit says." Daniel's voice cracked. "I just want peace, Mama. I'm trying." Grace kissed his forehead. "I know, my child. I pray for you. Every night, I call your name before God." In the months that followed, Daniel's visits became fewer. Juliet complained about him spending too much time at his mother's. "Daniel, you need to stop running to that old house every week. This is your home now. You're a married man." "But she's my mother, Juliet. She can pray for you from her house." To maintain peace, Daniel got Grace a small flat in a quiet part of town and employed a kind young girl named Ada to care for her. He made sure the place was stocked with food, paid the rent in advance, and visited after work when he could. Grace never complained. She only smiled when he came and blessed him when he left. But inside, she felt a storm brewing. At night, she prayed harder than she ever had. The house felt unusually quiet that evening. Daniel sat in the living room, staring at his phone. For months, the distance between him and Juliet had grown. She barely spoke to him unless necessary, stayed out late with flimsy excuses, and refused to answer questions. That night, his gut churned with unease. Juliet appeared from the kitchen, holding a covered tray. "Your favorite," she said with a forced smile. "Egusi soup with pounded yam." Daniel looked up, surprised. "Really? Wow. Thank you." He hadn't seen her make him a meal in weeks. As she placed the food before him, she added softly, "I know I've been distant. I want to make it up to you." Daniel smiled faintly, the knots in his stomach loosening just a little. Maybe things could turn around. He picked up the spoon, scooped a mouthful, and began to eat. Juliet sat opposite him, watching intently, her phone in hand, texting someone rapidly. She barely noticed when he coughed. "Are you okay?" she asked without emotion. Daniel pressed a hand to his chest. A sharp pain shot through his stomach, followed by a wave of nausea. "Juliet. What's in this food?" She stood slowly, her lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, don't bother, Daniel. It'll all be over soon." His eyes widened. "What? What do you mean?" Juliet picked up her handbag and car keys. "You should have listened, Daniel." But no, Mama's boy had to be stubborn. Daniel tried to stand, but his legs buckled. She leaned in close, her voice cold. "Emika's waiting. We're leaving this cursed country tonight, with your money, your life. Everything." Daniel gasped, his vision blurring. He reached for his phone but it slipped from his fingers. Without another word, Juliet walked out. At the gate, the old gateman, Pa Amos, looked up in surprise. "Madam, you day travel this night?" "Open the gate, old fool." She snapped. Amos hesitated. Something felt wrong. She sped off into the night. Inside, Daniel lay crumpled on the floor. Half an hour passed. Amos, pacing nervously, noticed the house was dark, silent. His spirit troubled, he hurried in. "Olga, Daniel. Olga." No answer. He found Daniel, lifeless, eyes half open. Amos screamed, raising alarm. Neighbors rushed in. He was rushed to the hospital, dead on arrival, 2 weeks later. The funeral service was set. Juliet was nowhere to be found. Grace arrived, face drawn but resolute. They tried to stop her at the church doors. "Mama Grace, please, it's too much for you." "I must see my son," she said quietly. The church was filled to the brim the day of Daniel's funeral. Men and women in somber clothes filled the pews. Colleagues from his office, neighbors, church members, all came to pay their respects to the young man whose life had been cut short too soon. Grace arrived in a black dress, Ada holding her steady. Her face was gaunt, her eyes swollen from days of tears, but there was a fire in them no one could extinguish. "Mama, please," one of the elders tried to stop her at the church entrance. "It might be too much for you." Grace squared her shoulders. "He's my son. I carried him in my womb, in my arms, on my back. No one will tell me where to be." Ada quickly followed as Grace made her way to the front. The casket lay at the altar, a polished, expensive box surrounded by wreaths. The air was thick with mourning. As the final prayers began, Grace slowly stood. "Please," she spoke, her voice cracking yet firm. "Let me carry my son once more." Murmurs rippled through the church. "Mama, it's not possible," a deacon said softly. He's too heavy. You won't be able to." Grace's eyes blazed. "I said, let me carry my son." It took two hesitant young men to lift the casket lid and gently raise Daniel's lifeless body. The air held its breath as they laid him across Grace's frail shoulders. A collective gasp echoed. Someone wept loudly. Grace, trembling, took one shaky step, then another toward the altar. With every ounce of strength in her voice, she cried out, "My God! Many years ago, you told me to ask you for anything. I've never asked. Never once. But today, I ask." Tears streamed down her face. The church fell silent, save for the sound of her voice. Breaking and rising with raw agony, "This is my only child. My everything. You gave him to me when I had nothing. You promised to watch over him. I held my peace, but not today, Lord. I ask now, return him to me." She fell to her knees, Daniel's lifeless form still across her shoulders. "Mighty God of heaven, breathe into my son. Show these people that you are still God." The congregation began to weep. Some knelt. Some lifted their hands. A full minute passed, then another, and then, a faint, unmistakable sound, a sneeze. The first person to hear it was Ada. "Jesus!" She screamed. Another sneeze, head snapped to attention. Daniel's hand twitched. A woman fainted. The priest dropped his Bible. "Daniel." Grace sobbed. He groaned. Where am I?" The church erupted. People shouted. Cried. Fell to their knees. Grace clutched him, tears pouring. "Thank you, Jehovah. Thank you." Daniel, weak and dazed, looked into his mother's face. "Mama. I had a dream. I saw Papa. He said you were calling me." Grace laughed through her tears. "I called, my son. I called heaven." The miracle was undeniable. The story spread across the country. People who had doubted God found their faith again. Juliet and Emeka were arrested. Daniel kept his promise and built his mother a big house, and each time Grace knelt before the altar, she smiled, because she knew. Heaven still listens. This is a real-life experience. If you love this story, like, share to 3 people, and subscribe for more stories.